There is a way. And that way was given to us by no other than Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere of Tanzania. During our lifetime, Nyerere became the president of a country called Tanganyika, which has over 136 different ethnicities. That country entered into a political union with another country called Zanzibar to create a country called Tanzania. If you go to Tanzania, the mode of mobilization is ideological. We are Tanzanians. Unfortunately, in Kenya, we have had a group of selfish politicians. This is Kenya's undoing. A great country with a great people, but with some of the worst politicians whose only claim to fame is that with one side of the mouth they claim they are Kenyans, but with the other side of the mouth they are mobilizing their people on the basis of ethnicity and ethnic affiliation. The use of the word tribe was very deliberate when the British were making a reference to African peoples. When they talked about tribes, they talked about a people who shared a common language and who, in their view, were natives and uncivilized, and therefore normally very reluctant to use the word tribe, because as regards them, they called themselves nations. We are nations. The English would say they are the nation of the English people. The Scots are a nation, the Irish are a nation, the Welsh are a nation, but the Kikuyus are a tribe, the Luos are a tribe, the Yoruba is a tribe, the Igbo is a tribe. So when I use the word tribe from now henceforth, I'm using it simply because of its familiarity, not because it is a word that I love. And I'll use the word tribe even to describe non-African populations. It must be remembered that when the colonists came, particularly the British, their mode of operation was divide and rule. And when they came with a system of administration that was characterized as indirect rule. And they very quickly tried to identify the differences between and amongst the tribes and exploited them to good effect. And even within the tribes, they tried to find differences and exploited them to good effect. So they incorporated some individuals to be the chieftains. So chiefs were created, assistant chiefs were created. The Kikuyu were made to believe that the Luos were their enemies, the Kambas were their enemies, and vice versa. And in that way, they planted the seed of suspicion and discord. And when African countries and African peoples started the struggle to regain their independence, it's important to note that in many African countries, the emerging leaders from different African communities recognized that ethnic animosity was artificial, and that the cultural and linguistic differences ought not to be a basis of conflict. And whether you are talking about Kenya or Uganda, you can see in the struggle for independence, people worked in solidarity without paying due regard to their tribal affiliation. The same was true in Nigeria. The same was true in Zambia. The same was true in Tanzania. The same was true in Uganda, and indeed across the continent. So that the independence movements were movements which de-emphasized ethnicity. But when we regained independence, in a number of countries, opportunistic politicians started recoiling into their ethnic cocoons and started articulating issues and giving out state largesse on the basis of ethnic affiliation. This was very evident, for example, in Kenya, when on the eve of independence, the organization of the political parties was informed fundamentally by some clear ideology, African socialism, so it was. So the Kenya African National Union was one that was nationalistic, and they talked about the things that affected Kenya as a country. But the white man very quickly came in and told the other so-called small tribes that Kanu is dominated by the Kikuyu and the Luos. Therefore, form another party that will take care of your interests. And this is how the Kenya Africa Democratic Union was put together to bring in tribes which were now manufactured, some of them Kalenjin, which put together several sub-tribes. And they also put in the Mijikenda, and they said, you are the Kenya Africa Democratic Union. Therefore, your enemies are Kanu. You can see the stealth hand of the colonialists. They are now beginning to create a post-colonial environment that is going to be conflictual, so that they continue to exploit and continue to ensure that the neo-colonial project is alive and well. Post-independence, you see that attempts are made to diffuse this. In Kenya, for example, when the KANU administration persuaded the KADU politicians to dissolve their party and to join KANU because of national solidarity. So that works very well between 1963 and 1964 and 1965. But once again, in 1966, you now begin to see in Kenya the emergence of what some historians will describe as ideological differences. But even if there is some element of a salutary gesture to ideology as being communist on the one hand and capitalist on the one hand, one begins to see ethnic characterization of that division. One begins to see politicians who are now inclining towards their ethnicity, politicians who are now making judgments based on ethnic superiority and dominance. And as a Kenyan writer and former politician once rightly say, and I agree with him, that these so-called tribal kingpins are individuals who are bankrupt of ideas. And Nyerere puts it much better. He says, any politician who uses religion and ethnicity as a basis of mobilization is one who is suffering from intellectual bankruptcy and ideological bankruptcy. They therefore weaponize their people by creating artificial enemies, and they ride on the crest of tribalism and use it as a basis of mobilization and as a basis of weaponization of the people to the detriment of the entire society. And in multi-ethnic societies, what they succeed in doing is to do exactly what the colonizer used to do: divide and rule. Because the tribal elites now recruit the hoi polloi, or the common man, into their agenda merely as cannon fodder, but essentially they are using them for political gain. And that is the nature of ethnic politics wherever one travels across the continent of Africa. But it must be remembered that tribalism is not unique to Africa. Almost all European nations are founded on tribalism. And where there are multi-ethnicities in Europe, there'll always be a problem. And if you ever doubted that that was true, remember the Spanish Civil War? Remember the breakup of Yugoslavia? Remember the collapse of the Soviet Union? All these are things that are happening because of ethnicity. And if you go to Asia, remember the division between India and Pakistan, and ultimately the creation of Bangladesh. There is a way, and that way was given to us by no other than Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere of Tanzania. During our lifetime, Nyerere became the president of a country called Tanganyika, which has over 136 different ethnicities. That country entered into a political union with another country called Zanzibar to create a country called Tanzania. If you go to Tanzania, the mode of mobilization is ideological. We are Tanzanians. It started with Ujamaa, with the Arusha Declaration in 1967, with Kiswahili language as the unifier. Tanzania is one of the few countries in the continent of Africa where somebody from one ethnic group can contest for a political seat in another area populated by another ethnic group, and he or she will be elected on the basis of their belongingness to Chama cha Mapinduzi or Chadema. Nyerere demonstrated it, and he said that what we must do is to celebrate our diversity. If you are Chaga, or Amhaya, or Sukuma, or Luo, or Mnyakyusa, celebrate your Mnyakyusa-ness, or Sukuma-ness, or Chaga-ness, but that should not stand in the way of your Tanzania-ness. Another person who tried to do it was Samora Moises Machel of Mozambique. And Samora said, for the new African nation to thrive and survive, the tribe must die. And what did it mean? That the tribe must die, that the tribalism as a basis of political mobilization must be thrown to the museums of history to reside alongside old implements like stone cutting instruments. That happened, so it can be done. Unfortunately, in Kenya, we have had a group of selfish politicians. This is Kenya's undoing. A great country with a great people, but with some of the worst politicians whose only claim to fame is that with one side of the mouth they claim they are Kenyans, but with the other side of the mouth they are mobilizing their people on the basis of ethnicity and ethnic affiliation. That is our undoing. And until the day that we change what sometimes I call either a character transplant of these selfish, ethnic inclined politicians or a total mental revolution, ethnicity will always be the modus operandi in Kenya. And it is incumbent and it behooves those who love this country to begin to sing the message of unity in diversity.